When Samuel Creek's stubborn donkey refused to stop digging in the same spot for an entire week, the lonely Montana rancher thought his animal had simply lost its mind. But after finally grabbing a shovel to help excavate the mysterious hole, Samuel unearthed a buried strongbox that would reveal a family secret powerful enough to reclaim his stolen legacy and restore his faith in trust. But what ancient wisdom had guided his four-legged friend to the exact location of a treasure that had been waiting in the darkness for over 4 years? Samuel Creek's coffee mug slipped from his fingers as a strange sound pierced the Montana morning air. The tin cup clattered against his porch steps, spilling dark liquid across weathered wood, while his donkey, Gus, made the most peculiar noise he'd ever heard from the animal. It wasn't a normal bray or snort, but something almost like crying. The year 1862 had brought nothing but trouble to the territory, and Samuel figured this was just another problem to add to his growing list. 3 winters had passed since he'd fled St. Louis with nothing but shame and a broken heart. His own brother William had stood in that courtroom, pointing an accusing finger and swearing Samuel had stolen cattle that belonged to their family. The judge's gavel had sealed his fate, forcing him to abandon everything he'd known and loved. Now, at 41 years old, Samuel lived alone on this small ranch, tucked between rolling hills and endless sky. Most folks in the valley below thought he was touched in the head because he talked to his animals like they were people. Truth was, animals made better company than most people he'd met. They didn't lie, cheat, or betray you when times got tough. The strange crying sound came again, pulling Samuel from his bitter memories. He wiped his hands on his worn pants and stepped off the porch, boots crunching through frost-covered grass. October mornings in Montana could freeze a man's breath, but today felt different somehow. The air seemed to hum with something he couldn't name. Gus stood near the old fence post at the far end of the corral, his gray head lowered toward the ground. The donkey's ears twitched back and forth like he was listening to something Samuel couldn't hear. As Samuel got closer, he noticed dark patches of disturbed earth around Gus's hooves. "What's got into you, old friend?" Samuel asked, his voice gentle despite his confusion. Gus had been acting strange for days now, always returning to this same spot, no matter how many times Samuel led him away. The animal would eat his morning oats, drink from the water trough, then march straight back to this corner of the corral, like he had important business to attend to. Samuel knelt beside the shallow hole Gus had been digging. The earth was soft here, easier to move than the hard-packed dirt everywhere else. Strange, considering this corner of the corral got the least water and the most sun. By all rights, the ground should be baked solid. The donkey nudged Samuel's shoulder with his velvet nose, then looked down at the hole again. Those big brown eyes seemed to be trying to tell him something important, but Samuel couldn't figure out what. In all his years working with animals, he'd never seen behavior quite like this. A cold wind swept down from the mountains, carrying the scent of coming snow. Winter would arrive early this year. Samuel could feel it in his bones. He needed to finish preparing the ranch for the harsh months ahead, not waste time trying to solve the mystery of his donkey's strange obsession with digging holes. But as he started to stand up, Gus planted himself firmly in front of the hole and refused to move. The sun climbed higher, but Gus remained planted like a stubborn tree root beside his mysterious digging spot. Samuel had tried everything he could think of to lure the donkey away. Fresh hay, sweet apples, even the molasses treats that usually sent Gus trotting over with eager enthusiasm. Nothing worked. The gray animal just stood guard over his hole, ears alert and eyes watchful. "This is pure foolishness," Samuel muttered, fetching a bucket of water from the well. If Gus wanted to dig holes, fine, but Samuel had real work to do. The barn roof needed patching before the first snow, and his small herd of cattle required moving to the lower pasture, where they'd find better shelter from winter storms. But every time Samuel tried to focus on his chores, his gaze drifted back to Gus. The donkey had begun making soft, whimpering sounds that tugged at Samuel's heart. In 3 years of living together, Gus had never acted distressed about anything. He was the calmest, most sensible animal Samuel had ever known. By midday, Samuel's curiosity finally won the battle against his practical nature. He grabbed his shovel from the barn and marched over to the corral, determination written across his weathered face. "All right, you stubborn creature, you win. But we're going to settle this once and for all." Gus stepped aside immediately, as if he'd been waiting for Samuel to make this exact decision. The donkey's ears perked up, and he made a sound that almost resembled approval. Samuel shook his head, wondering when he'd started believing his animals could actually communicate with him. The first shovel full of dirt came up easily, revealing darker soil underneath. Samuel frowned. The earth here was different from the rest of the corral, richer, softer, like it had been disturbed before. But that made no sense. He'd owned this ranch for 3 years, and before that, the land had sat empty for as long as anyone could remember. As Samuel dug deeper, Gus began pacing around the hole, his hooves creating a steady rhythm against the packed earth. The donkey's excitement was obvious now, though Samuel still couldn't understand what had triggered such behavior. Animals were supposed to be simple creatures, driven by basic needs like food, water, and shelter. They weren't supposed to develop mysterious obsessions with random patches of ground. At 2 feet down, Samuel's shovel struck something that definitely wasn't dirt or rock. The metallic clang echoed across the empty corral, causing Gus to let out a triumphant bray that could probably be heard clear down in the valley. Samuel's heart began hammering against his ribs as he carefully cleared away more soil, revealing what appeared to be the corner of a metal box. His hands trembled as he worked to uncover more of the mysterious object. The box was small but heavy, made of some kind of dark metal that had turned green with age. A thick padlock secured the lid, and strange markings covered the surface. Markings that looked almost like letters, though Samuel couldn't make them out clearly through the dirt and corrosion. Gus nudged his shoulder again, more insistently this time. The donkey's brown eyes seemed to sparkle with something that looked remarkably like satisfaction, as if he'd just completed the most important task of his entire life. Samuel sat back on his heels, staring at the buried box and wondering what secrets it might contain. Who had buried it here? And why? How had Gus known exactly where to dig? And most importantly, what was he supposed to do now? Samuel's muscles screamed as his shovel bit deeper into the Montana earth, but something electric buzzed in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced since before the terrible events in St. Louis 3 years ago. Gus stood guard beside the growing hole like a furry soldier, his dark eyes never leaving Samuel's work. The morning sun climbed higher, painting the ranch in golden light that made everything feel possible again. "You picked one heck of a spot to get curious about, old friend," Samuel panted, wiping dirt from his forehead. The hole was now deep enough that he had to jump down into it to continue digging. Each shovelful revealed darker soil, the kind that hadn't seen sunlight in many years. His hands, tough from ranch work, began forming blisters inside his worn leather gloves. Gus suddenly brayed not his usual lazy morning call, but something urgent and excited. The donkey paced around the edge of the hole, his hooves making quick clicking sounds on the hard ground. Samuel had never seen his companion act this way. In 3 years of shared solitude, Gus had been calm, steady, almost sleepy. Now the animal vibrated with energy that made Samuel's heart beat faster. "What's got you so worked up?" Samuel asked. But even as the words left his mouth, his shovel struck something that definitely wasn't dirt or rock. The metallic clang echoed across the empty corral, sending a chill down Samuel's spine. He dropped to his knees and began clearing soil with his hands, his fingers trembling as they traced the edges of what felt like a metal box. The object was rectangular, about the size of a small suitcase, and heavier than it looked. Green stains covered its surface, the color metal turned after years underground. Samuel's throat felt dry, as he lifted it from its earthen bed. Whatever this was, it had been waiting here for a very long time. Gus leaned over the hole's edge, his wet nose almost touching Samuel's shoulder, and let out a soft, satisfied snort. Samuel climbed out of the hole with the mysterious box clutched against his chest. His legs shook, but not from tiredness. Questions raced through his mind like wild horses. Who had buried this here? When? And most puzzling of all, how had Gus known exactly where to find it? The box felt warm against his shirt, as if it contained something alive. A small padlock, green with age but still solid, kept its secrets locked away. Samuel stared at it, hardly believing what had just happened. 1 week ago, he'd been a lonely man whose only conversations were with his animals. Now he held what might be the answer to questions he didn't even know he should ask. "Well, Gus," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion he didn't understand yet. "I guess we better find out what treasure you've been guarding all this time." Samuel's kitchen had never felt so small as he placed the mysterious box on his wooden table, pushing aside his breakfast plate that had grown cold hours ago. The morning light streaming through his window made the metal container look ancient and important, like something from a fairy tale his mother used to tell him. His coffee cup sat forgotten as he stared at the padlock, wondering what secrets lay hidden beneath that green-stained lid. Gus had followed him inside something the donkey never did, and now stood in the doorway watching with those intelligent brown eyes. Samuel's hands shook as he searched through his tool drawer for something strong enough to break the old lock. The metal was soft from years underground, but the mechanism still held tight. "Here goes nothing," Samuel whispered, placing his chisel against the lock's weakest point. 3 careful hammer strikes, and the ancient metal gave way with a satisfying crack. The sound seemed to fill the entire cabin with possibility. Samuel set down his tools and took a deep breath before lifting the heavy lid. Inside, wrapped in what looked like oiled leather, were bundles of papers tied with faded ribbon. Beneath them sat a cloth pouch that clinked with the unmistakable sound of coins. Samuel's heart hammered so hard, he thought Gus might hear it from across the room. With trembling fingers, he lifted out the first bundle and carefully untied the ribbon. The papers were covered in handwriting. He recognized immediately his father's careful script, the same writing that had taught him to read using Bible verses and farming almanacs. But these weren't farming records or Bible quotes. The first document made Samuel's breath catch in his throat. It was a land deed, dated 1858, bearing his father's signature and describing the exact boundaries of the ranch where Samuel now lived. But that couldn't be right. His father had sold this property before he died, hadn't he? Samuel's brother William had told him their father needed money to pay debts, that everything had been sold to keep the family name clean. Yet here was proof that Jonas Creek had owned this land right up until his death 4 years ago. Samuel unfolded another paper, a letter addressed to him in his father's steady handwriting. The date at the top made his vision blur, just 1 week before his father's final illness. The words seemed to jump off the page. "My dear son Samuel, if you're reading this, then the worst has happened, and I'm no longer able to tell you the truth myself." Gus stepped closer, his warm breath touching Samuel's shoulder, as if the donkey understood the importance of this moment. Samuel's voice cracked as he read aloud. "I never sold this ranch, boy. I kept it for you, knowing that someday you'd need a place to call home when the world turned hard. The deed is buried where we used to count stars on summer nights, waiting for the day you'd be ready to find it." The letter continued, but Samuel's eyes were too full of tears to read further. His father had known. Somehow, Jonas Creek had known that his son would need this place, this proof, this gift of belonging. And somehow, impossibly, Gus had known exactly where to dig. Heavy hoofbeats pounded against the dry Montana earth like war drums announcing trouble. Samuel looked up from the precious papers spread across his kitchen table, his heart sinking as 5 horsemen appeared on the ridge above his small ranch. The lead rider wore a silver star that caught the morning sunlight, Sheriff Morrison, and beside him rode the one person Samuel never wanted to see again. His younger brother William. "Hide everything, Gus," Samuel whispered to the donkey, who had wandered inside and now stood alert by the window. The smart animal seemed to understand danger better than most people Samuel knew. With shaking hands, he gathered the deed, the letters from their father, and the leather pouch of coins, stuffing them all back into the metal strongbox. His bedroom closet would have to do for now. The riders dismounted with purpose, their boots hitting the ground in unison like soldiers preparing for battle. Samuel opened his front door before they could knock, trying to appear calm, even though his mouth felt as dry as summer dust. Sheriff Morrison tipped his hat politely, but William's face looked like thunderclouds ready to burst. "Morning, Samuel," the sheriff said in his official voice. "We've got ourselves a situation that needs sorting out." "What kind of situation?" Samuel asked, though he already feared the answer. William stepped forward, his jaw set tight with anger. The kind where someone's been living on land that doesn't belong to them. Again. The word "again" hit Samuel like a slap, bringing back memories of the cattle trial in St. Louis, where his own brother had testified against him. Samuel's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "This is my land, William. I've been working it for 3 years. "Working stolen land," one of the other men called out from behind the sheriff. Samuel recognized him as Pete Jenkins, who owned the general store in town. "My cousin wants to buy this property, but there's no clear title on record." Sheriff Morrison pulled out a folded paper from his coat pocket. "That's the problem, Samuel. The territorial office shows this land as unclaimed. No deed, no registration, nothing. If you can't prove ownership, we're going to have to ask you to pack up and move along." Samuel felt the world spinning around him like a dust devil. Just moments ago, he had discovered proof that his father had left him this ranch as a legacy. Now his own brother was trying to steal it away, just like he had done with the cattle back east. The irony burned in his chest like swallowed fire. "I need time," Samuel said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Time for what?" William demanded. "Time to forge more documents like you did before?" The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Samuel's temper, buried deep for so long, began to rise like floodwater behind a weakening dam. Gus moved closer to his side, the donkey's warm presence giving him strength he didn't know he still possessed. "I was cleared of those charges," Samuel said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "And I can prove this land belongs to me." Sheriff Morrison raised an eyebrow. "How's that, Samuel? Because we've looked everywhere for paperwork, and there isn't any." Samuel glanced at Gus, remembering how the donkey had led him to the buried treasure that morning. Sometimes the most important things were hidden in the last places anyone would think to look. His father had been clever, hiding the deed where only Samuel would eventually find it. But would anyone believe such an impossible story? "The proof was buried," Samuel announced, watching their faces change from doubt to curiosity to outright disbelief. Pete Jenkins let out a harsh laugh. "Buried treasure? What is this, some children's fairy tale?" But Sheriff Morrison held up his hand for silence, his experienced eyes studying Samuel's face carefully. "Explain yourself, son." Samuel pointed toward the corral where the freshly filled hole was still visible. "My donkey spent a week digging in that exact spot. I thought he'd gone crazy, but this morning I helped him dig deeper. We found a metal box that my father buried before he died." William's face went pale as fresh snow. "Father never said anything about burying papers." "Father said a lot of things you never listened to," Samuel replied, surprised by his own boldness. For years, he had accepted blame and shame like daily medicine. But standing here with the truth literally in his hands, something inside him had shifted like tectonic plates beneath the earth. "Show us," Sheriff Morrison commanded, dismounting from his horse with the fluid motion of a man who had spent decades in the saddle. Samuel retrieved the strongbox from his hiding place, his hands steadier now than they had been all morning. The weight of it felt like holding his entire future. He set it on the wooden porch rail where everyone could see, then opened the lid with a creak that sounded like a door opening to a new life. The papers were exactly as he had left them, his father's careful handwriting still clear after 4 years underground. Sheriff Morrison picked up the deed first, examining it closely while the other men crowded around. Samuel watched William's face as recognition dawned in his younger brother's eyes. "This is Father's signature," William whispered, his voice hollow with shock. "I'd know it anywhere." Sheriff Morrison nodded slowly. "This deed is dated 1858, properly signed and witnessed. According to this, Jonas Creek purchased this land from the territorial government and designated it to pass to his eldest son upon his death." "But that's impossible," Pete Jenkins protested. "My cousin checked all the records. There's no mention of any Creek family owning this property." Samuel pulled out one of his father's letters, unfolding it carefully. "Listen to this," he said, and began reading aloud. "Samuel, I know the world has been hard on you, but sometimes the most valuable things are hidden from those who would steal them. I've kept this deed secret, buried where we used to count stars on summer nights. The territorial office has a copy, but it's filed under a different name to protect it from your brother's debts." The silence that followed was broken only by the wind whistling through the fence posts. Samuel looked at each man's face, seeing the gradual acceptance of truth dawning in their expressions. Even Pete Jenkins seemed convinced, though he clearly wasn't happy about it. William stepped closer, his voice thick with emotion. "What name did Father use to file it?" Samuel smiled for the first time in months. "Creek's End Ranch, owned by J. Samuel Creek. He used both our names, William. He never forgot about either of his sons." Sheriff Morrison carefully examined each document, his weathered hands treating the papers like precious artifacts. "These appeared genuine to me. The signatures match other documents I've seen from Jonas Creek, and the territorial seal looks authentic." He looked up at Samuel with something that might have been respect. "Your father was a smart man, hiding assets this way." The other men began mounting their horses, the purpose of their visit clearly concluded. But William remained standing in the dust, staring at his brother, with eyes that held years of regret and newfound understanding. "Samuel," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something about St. Louis." The morning sun painted gold streaks across the Montana sky when William's horse appeared on the ridge again, but this time he wasn't alone. Samuel watched from his porch as his brother rode down with a woman and 2 small children. His heart jumped, ejected pest. After 3 months of awkward but growing friendship, William was bringing his family to meet the uncle they'd never known existed. "Uncle Samuel." The little girl with pigtails bounced in her saddle, waving wildly. Her brother, maybe 6 years old, clutched the saddle horn with white knuckles but managed a shy smile. Samuel felt something crack open in his chest. A wall he'd built around his heart since 1862 was crumbling. "Martha, children, this is my brother Samuel," William said as they dismounted. His wife was prettier than Samuel had imagined, with kind eyes that reminded him of their mother. She stepped forward without fear, extending her hand. "We've heard so much about you," Martha said warmly. "William told us about the ranch, about Gus, about everything that happened." Her voice carried no judgment, only curiosity and acceptance. The children rushed toward the corral where Gus stood watching. "Can we pet him?" little Emma asked, her eyes wide with wonder. Samuel nodded, leading them over. As the donkey lowered his head for scratches, Samuel noticed William hanging back, his face troubled. "Something eating at you, brother?" Samuel asked quietly, while the children giggled at Gus's gentle snorts. William kicked at a clod of dirt. "The truth is, Samuel, I didn't just come for a visit. There's been talk in town again. Some of the cattle ranchers are saying you don't belong up here. They want this land for winter grazing." Samuel's stomach tightened. "The deed is legal. Sheriff Morrison confirmed it." "I know that, and you know that," William replied. "But you know how people can be when they want something. They're saying you're just one man with a donkey, that you can't properly use all this land." Martha approached with the children, who were now feeding Gus handfuls of grass. "William, you promised we'd talk about this together. she said firmly. Her husband's face reddened. Talk about what? Samuel asked, sensing undercurrents he didn't understand. Martha looked at William, then at Samuel. We want to move up here. William lost his job at the mill last month. We thought maybe we could help you run the ranch, be partners, instead of just brothers visiting once in a while. Samuel blinked in surprise. After years of solitude, the idea of sharing his space felt both thrilling and terrifying. You'd want to live here? It's rough country, especially in winter. We're not afraid of hard work, Martha said. And the children need fresh air, room to grow. Plus, she added with a smile, someone needs to help you take care of that remarkable donkey of yours. Emma tugged on Samuel's sleeve. Uncle Samuel. Gus whispered something in my ear. Samuel knelt down to her level. What did he say? He said he's been lonely too, but now he's happy because there are more friends to play with. The little girl's innocent words hit Samuel like lightning. Even his donkey understood what he'd been too proud to admit, that life was meant to be shared. William cleared his throat. The cattle ranchers are planning to meet with the territorial governor next month. They're going to petition to have your land claim reviewed again. Say you're not developing it properly. But if we're working it together, as a family operation, they'd have a harder time making their case. Samuel finished. He looked around at his small ranch, imagining it filled with laughter, children's voices, the bustle of a real family operation. Gus nudged his shoulder, as if encouraging him. Yes, Samuel said simply. Yes, let's do this together. 2 years later, in the spring of 1864, Samuel Creek stood in the same spot where Gus had first started digging, but everything around him had changed. The corral now held 3 horses, 2 milk cows, and Gus, who had appointed himself supervisor of all ranch activities. Children's laughter echoed from the expanded cabin, where William's family had built their own addition. Uncle Samuel, come quick! 8-year-old Tommy came running across the yard, his face flushed with excitement. Gus is doing that digging thing again, but in a different spot. Samuel grinned and followed his nephew to the vegetable garden where, sure enough, Gus was carefully pawing at the earth near the fence. But this time, Samuel wasn't worried. Over the past 2 years, they'd learned that Gus had an unusual talent for finding things, lost tools, the best spots for wells, even a family of baby rabbits that needed rescuing. What do you think he's found now? Martha asked, wiping her flour-covered hands on her apron as she joined them. Behind her, Emma carried baby Rose, William and Martha's newest addition born just last winter. Only one way to find out, Samuel said, fetching his shovel. The whole family gathered around as he carefully dug where Gus indicated. This time, instead of a metal box, Samuel's shovel struck something smooth and curved. It's pottery, Emma squealed, as Samuel brushed dirt away from what appeared to be a small clay jar. Inside, wrapped in waterproof leather, they found arrowheads, beads, and a piece of carved bone with markings none of them could read. Native artifacts, William said respectfully. This must have been important to someone. Samuel nodded, understanding flooding through him. We should return these to the tribal elders down in the valley. These aren't ours to keep. That afternoon, Samuel and William rode to the small native settlement near the river. Chief Running Bear, a dignified man with silver-streaked braids, examined the artifacts with reverence. These belong to my grandfather's grandfather, the chief said slowly. They were buried here when the soldiers came, to keep them safe. We had given up hope of ever finding them again. Gus knew where to look, Samuel explained, feeling slightly foolish. Our donkey. He has a way of finding things that matter. Chief Running Bear's weathered face broke into a smile. Animals often understand the world better than we do. Your donkey has given my people back a piece of our history. This is a great gift. As they prepared to leave, the chief placed a hand on Samuel's shoulder. You and your family are always welcome in our village. The spirits have blessed you with a wise companion and generous hearts. Riding home in the golden afternoon light, Samuel reflected on how much his life had changed since Gus first started digging. The cattle ranchers had eventually given up their petition when they saw the Creek family successfully working the land together. The ranch now produced enough hay and vegetables to supply half the valley, and Martha's cheese had become famous in 3 counties. "You know what I think," William said as they approached their home, where smoke curled peacefully from 2 chimneys and children's voices carried on the wind. "What's that?" "I think Gus didn't just find Father's deed by accident. I think somehow he knew you needed more than land. You needed family, purpose, a reason to trust again." Samuel patted Gus's neck as the donkey grazed contentedly nearby. "Maybe you're right. Or maybe he just likes digging holes." Both brothers laughed, but Samuel suspected William was closer to the truth. In the Montana Territory of 1864, Samuel Creek had learned that the greatest treasures weren't always buried in the ground. Sometimes they were found in the courage to let others close enough to help you dig.